Hello, welcome to Truth Behind the Showcases, your global fashion retail and supply chain podcast. Today, Monday, June 15th. Hormuz reopens, but freight rates were already climbing before the ink dried. China just made in China harder to prove. Nearshoring's business case has never been stronger, and the data is finally saying it out loud. Plus, the World Cup recycled polyester bet is the biggest market signal in sustainable materials this decade. I'm Sedat Sezer, breaking down the news and insights you need to start your day. Let's get started. Let's start with what just happened, because it changes the macro backdrop for every other story we cover today. The US and Iran has reached a peace agreement. Trump announced it overnight. A ceasefire across all fronts. Hormuz reopens without transit fees. The US naval blockade lifts, and a nuclear disarmament framework kicks in. The formal signing is set for June 19th in Genoa. The war began in late February. For roughly 3.5 months, the Strait of Hormuz, through which about 20% of the world's seaborne oil flows, has been a choke point for global commodity pricing. Brent crude ran above $86 a barrel for most of that period. Energy-linked inputs, polyester, synthetic fuel surcharges absorbed that pressure the entire time. Now here's what I'm actually watching. The deal removes the geopolitical risk premium. Brent started dropping immediately. Goldman Sachs has argued the dollar would stay strong as long as Hormuz was closed. That logic inverts now. But don't confuse the crisis is over with cost resets overnight. The safety stock that factories and brands have been building, the freight commitments already contracted, those don't unwind in a week. What lifts first is sentiment. What lifts last is contracted logistic. And we'll get to that in a moment. I'll be direct. The relief is real. But it arrived too late for the spring order cycle. The factories that stretched their balance sheet absorbing rising energy and material costs during these 3 months don't get that back. That cost was either passed through or it wasn't. The ones we couldn't pass it through are the ones in trouble today. Which connects directly to the freight picture, and here the irony of today's news becomes very clear. The Delivery World Container Index printed $3,549 per FEU this week, up from $2,216 at the end of April. That's a 60% surge in 6 weeks. Shanghai to New York is at $5,870. MSC announced $6,000 per container to North Europe from today. CMA and CGM and ONE are adding peak season surcharges on top of that. So Hormuz opens and the rates are at 6-week high. That's not a contradiction, it's a timing problem. 3 forces converged simultaneously. Carriers priced for the usual pre-holiday demand surge early. US buyers pulled forward orders ahead of July tariff changes. And the Middle East rerouting via the Cape of Good Hope added days and fuel cost to every Asia-Europe voyage, and that capacity hasn't been redeployed yet. The GEP and S&P Global Supply Chain Volatility Index for May confirmed it. Safety stock reporting hit its highest level since January 2023. Manufacturers are building buffers. That demand is already in the system. For anyone with open Asia source shipments for the back half of the year, the resolution helps the medium-term picture. It does not help your July invoice. Be ready for that conversation with your finance team. Looking at the other side of the coin, while logistic is mostly about cost, the next story is about risk of a very different kind. Fiber to Fashion published a detailed analysis this week on what China's 2026 compliance decreases are doing to apparel sourcing. The headline is this: China is not becoming unworkable, it's becoming undocumentable. That's a meaningful distinction. The old cost concern was cost. The new concern is evidentiary. China is restricting the outward flow of supply chain data. Yarn origins, subcontractor records, cotton sourcing attestation. The exact documentation a US customs officer or European compliance team needs to verify a clean supply chain. This didn't come out of nowhere. It's a mirror image of what Washington and Brussels are building on their end. UFLPA enforcement and the EU forced label regulation, the incoming due diligence directive. Every Western compliance demand creates an incentive for China to restrict the corresponding data. The two regulatory architectures moving in opposite directions, with your sourcing team in the middle. China's textile and apparel exports run at $116.7 billion through May this year. The production is there. The capacity is there. What's becoming harder to get is the proof. And in a world where import bans are tied to documentation failures, proof is no longer a formality. It is the product. From where I sit, this is one of the most underreported structural shifts in global sourcing right now. Some brands are not moving volume because China got too expensive. They are moving it because China got too complicated to certify. Which brings us to a natural consequence of this picture, nearshoring. And I want to be careful here, because nearshoring is the future has been said enough times to lose meaning. What's different now is that the business case has real pressure behind it. Source Fashion put it plainly this week. China's share of global apparel export has dropped from 54% in 2010 to 47% today. That's not a collapse. It's a steady migration. And compliance walls and freight volatility are accelerating it. The regions getting European buyers' attention: Turkey, Morocco, Romania, Lithuania, and Egypt. For US buyers, it's Mexico and Central America. Though USMCA uncertainty adds complexity there that I'll be watching after the Washington talks this week. For the past 3 years, the nearshoring case was mostly defensive, risk mitigation, political cover, sustainability narrative. After this week, it's also offensive. Shorter transit windows means less freight exposure. Simpler documentation chains means less compliance risk. And for Mediterranean basin suppliers, Turkey's export unit value index printed 13.7% year-on-year growth in April. Prices are rising, but orders are holding. That's a market absorbing demand Asia can't cleanly serve right now. The window is real. I say this from 25 years of watching this industry. Windows like this one don't stay open forever. The brands that use this period to actually build nearshoring supplier relationships, not just add them to a diversification slide deck, will be operating from a structurally better position in 2 years. While all this happening, another issue on our radar comes from the sportswear sector before we close. At the FIFA World Cup, roughly 75% of the 48 competing nations are wearing kits supplied by Nike, Adidas, or Puma. And for the first time at this scale, all three are using textile-to-textile recycled polyester as the primary material. Nike's Aerofit fabric, 100% textile waste. Puma's Refiber, at least 95% textile origin recycled content. Here's why this matters. Right now, only 2% of recycled polyester globally comes from textile waste. The rest comes from plastic bottles. The circular loop, using old garments to make new ones, has been technically possible but commercially unproven at scale. What the World Cup does is send a massive market signal. When billions of viewers watch Nike kits made from textile waste, it tells recyclers and infrastructure developers there is a long-term, high-volume demand for this material. Pair that with the EU's eco-design regulation banning unsold garment destructions from July 2026, and you see the supply chain being pushed and pulled simultaneously. Brands need a circular feedstock. Regulators are cutting off the alternative. Lululemon moved on the same logic today, announcing an investment in a renewable energy fund that will power 100% of its mainland China supply chain by 2030, pulling demand from multiple brands to build wind and solar projects directly. H&M, Bestseller, and PVH are using similar models. The brands that built this infrastructure early will use it as a sourcing filter, creating two-tier supplier market where the compliance gap becomes commercial gap. Same pattern, different material. The main question I want to leave you today is: Hormuz resolved, freight is locked through summer, and China's documentation wall is rising. Which sourcing region are actually ready to absorb the volume brands need to move, not on a slide deck, but on a production line? and which ones are still just a footnote in a diversification strategy. That's all for today's analysis. To make sure you never miss the insights behind the numbers, hit subscribe wherever you get your podcast. I'm Sedat Sezer. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you tomorrow, and until then, stay ahead of the curve.